To all of you who have chosen to participate in this webinar, my name is John Gibson, and I will be moderating tonight's event in my role as State Coordinator of Sustainable Indiana 2016. Sustainable Indiana 2016 is a bicentennial initiative of Earth Charter Indiana, a nonprofit organization inspired by the values and principles set forth in the Charter, which is a roadmap for getting us all to a more sustainable, just, and peaceful future. The purpose of the Sustainable Indiana 2016 initiative is to compile an inventory of climate crisis solutions being implemented by Hoosiers all around the state that are worthy to be celebrated as a bicentennial legacy. Among those solutions are getting outdoors more, getting healthier and happier through walking, biking, and hiking. And that is what this webinar tonight is all about. To help us make the most of walking, biking, and hiking, we are privileged to have a panel of presenters who so-called know the territory. They are Bob Bronson, Alison O'Malley, and Eric Neagu. I will introduce each one of them just before they speak, and during their presentations, you are invited to post questions or comments in the webinar sidebar question box. These questions and comments will be collected and organized by Kathy Sipple, who is our 2016 media coordinator, and she will pass them on to the appropriate panelists after all the panelists have shared their perspectives on the topic. We have asked each presenter to limit their opening remarks to 10 minutes, so there will be time for questions and comments within the hour. Bob Bronson will get us started. His bio is on the screen, but I will read it for the benefit of listeners who have joined us by telephone. Bob Bronson is with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. He is chair of the Grants Section, Division of Outdoor Recreation. Bob is an avid biker and advocate for the Indiana Trail Network. Hi, Bob, and thank you for being on the panel tonight. We'd like to hear what you have to say now.
Hi, John. Thank you very much. Like John said, I work for the state of Indiana and have been employed by the state for working for the DNR for 23 years. I'd say the last 10 years, the state has made huge leaps and bounds in creating specifically bike ped trails, rail trail projects around the state. In 2006, the Governor Daniels initiated to create a trails plan called the Hoosiers on the Move, the Trails, Greenways, and Bikeways Plan. And at that time, there were about trails within, one of the goals was to have trails within 7.5 miles or 15 minutes of everybody in the state. And at that time, about 75% of the state had those trails available, and the governor knew the benefits of health and economics and brain drain and of all the reasons why trails are good, and specifically, trying to get, as an advocate, trying to get people out of their cars and on their bikes and out hiking and walking as a mode of transportation as well as recreation. So here in 2013, we now are reaching 98% of the state have a trail within 7.5 miles of their where they live. In 2006, there were almost 1,500 miles of trail that we knew about, and in in the last 7 years, we've actually almost doubled that amount with a 3,200 miles of trail. 250 miles of that are motorized trail, but almost 3,000 miles are bike ped, mountain bike, equestrian, hiking, those type of trails. So we've made a huge jump for Indiana. The surrounding states were ahead of us, particularly Minnesota probably has the most trails per capita in the Midwest, but Indiana made a huge jump. 10 years ago it was very difficult to even put a trail on the map because they're too controversial. But having an advocate at the highest office in the state really pushed us to actually be able to create trail. We use federal monies, state monies, stimulus monies, local funds, volunteers. It was just a collaboration of all these different entities that created trails from around the state. One of the main things that we're trying to do as a state is to actually get people to know where they're at. And I'm just going to do a kind of brief overview of some of the kind of flagship trails that we have in the state. We call them, some of them we call destination trails. You can actually load your bike on the back of your car and actually drive to them. One of those is the Cardinal Greenway, which is a 62-mile rail trail that runs from Richmond, Indiana to Muncie. There's like a 12-mile gap, and then it goes to Marion and then Sweetser, and it's heading west to hopefully connect up to the Nickel Plate Trail, which is a rail trail that runs north-south out of Peru, Indiana. It's a 33-mile trail, 20 miles north and 13 miles south of Peru. And then the idea was to create this visionary trail system, and online we have that vision, and both these trails are this vision spider web of trails that we're trying to make an interconnected system that someday, like I say, and not that unrealistic, you could literally ride from Muncie to Chicago. There are some gaps that'll take a little while, but we've made huge jumps in getting there. Another trail up in the Amish country, LaGrange, Elkhart County area is the Pumpkin Vine Trail. It's a 17-mile rail trail that actually is named after how the trail was. The train itself, the tracks was a windy trail, so that's why it was actually named the Pumpkin Vine, and it connects up to the Goshen Trail, which is like a 33-mile connected trail through that area of the state. There also is in southern part of the state, Evansville is making a push to get more trail on the ground. One of the systems they have is called the Pigeon Creek Greenway Passage. It's 6 to 8 miles long, but looking to extend that as we speak. Another trail is called the Farm Heritage Trail. It's a rail trail that will eventually run from Indianapolis to West Lafayette. Right now there's 10 miles on the ground, which active projects, funded projects on both ends of that. So we're adding, the whole trail movement is a piece-by-piece method. Briefly, another one's a B&O Trail, is a trail that's been around for trying to get on the ground for almost 20 years now. It owns 16 miles of trail that runs across Hendricks County, and about 3 miles of that is on the ground. Fort Wayne has been a big push to do trails. They have almost 60 miles of trail down. The Northwest Indiana has multiple trails. The the Marquette Greenway, Erie Lackawanna, Pensy, Veterans Trail. They're all either pieces of those Prairie Duneland are all being either done or being put down on the ground. Another one, more of a natural focus, is the Knobstone Trail. It's a 58-mile backpack hiking trail that runs north-south from just on the edge of Morgan County down into Jackson to the southern part of the state. We actually, as a Division of Outdoor Recreation, actually manage and maintain that trail. The Beeline Trail in Bloomington is a 3.2-mile trail that multi-million-dollar trail, but it's actually a 24-hour trail that the economic growth along that system, it's the kind of the backbone trail in Bloomington. Very efficient, very runs by the market, and there are businesses popping up all along that trail. Where you can find other trails, we at the Division of Outdoor Recreation with the DNR actually have a trail inventory that we are keeping that will show those 3,200 miles of trail. And that website is www.in.gov/DNR/outdoor. And we also, there's a couple other groups in the statewide trail organizations, and one of them is the Indiana the Indiana Trails Fund, and their website is www.indianatrails.com, and they have great descriptions of trails around the state and have even more detail. Our website at the DNR is not that user-friendly, and we'll be hopefully improving that in the near future. And then there's also their statewide organization for trails called the Greenways Foundation, which is www.greenwaysfoundation.org/trails. So those are some of the organizations and some of the things that we're doing. And to me, you know, I'm an environmentalist and outdoor recreationist, and try to get people. We have a lot of great nature preserves, state parks. Obviously the state parks have a lot of trails, and the nature preserves actually program actually realizes that to appreciate the true nature of what we've protected around the state, to have some type of access into those areas, and so people can appreciate them. So we get people to actually feel the outdoors by access through trails, to be able to fight for it, to move on. So it's nice to actually the combination of, for me to be a trail advocate and promoter and money supplier to actually benefit the natural world, as well as get people out and obviously active. So I'll stop there. That's my 10 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. That was a great rundown of what's out there. And I suspect that most of us had no idea of how extensive that trail system is. Those of you who have been listening in, jot down your questions now that you're going to want to pass on to Bob later on. I've got one of mine down. And we'll go on then now to Alison O'Malley. Welcome, Alison.
Hello, John.
I'm going to introduce you for those who are on telephone and cannot see your bio on the screen.
Sure.
But let me read this. Dr. Alison O'Malley is Assistant Professor of Psychology, Butler University. Dr. O'Malley does research and teaching at the nexus of work, happiness, and environment. And Allie is a new member of the Earth Charter Indiana Board of Directors. So, Allie, we'll be glad to hear your take on the benefits of getting outdoors more, and hiking and biking and walking. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. And is my screen displaying properly on everyone's end?
I can see it fine, yes.
Okay, marvelous. And for those of you, if you don't have the capacity to view the slides right now, if you're calling in, please don't fret. It is not an essential part of what I'm going to talk about by any means. But as John mentioned, I am a psychologist, and that might strike some of our listeners as surprising to bring the psychological perspective into this discussion, but I hope that the utility of this angle soon becomes clear. And the departure point for my remarks is going to focus around two specific benefits of placing ourselves, our bodies, in nature. And we have seen the literature just accumulate on how important it is for human beings to have direct experience with nature. That is, direct experience, not technologically mediated experience. And I'm going to focus in particular on two of these benefits, that being this idea that spending time out in the natural world, hiking, biking, walking, is wonderful for restoring our attention when our attention fades. And lastly, in terms of the end of this list, that spending time in nature promotes happiness, which is something many humans claim to covet very much. And so, just to give a bit of background for my inspiration here, I think it's worthy to consider these topics because much of our modern life prohibits us from spending a lot of time in nature. Now, that's of course not true across the board, but many of us, given the nature of our work lives and our home lives, are not able to spend a lot of time in the outdoors. And this is somewhat unfortunate because we know that the less time we spend in nature, the less we feel a part of it. That is, we feel more detached from it. And the more detached we feel from nature, the less motivated we are to protect it. And by protecting it, I'm talking about what we actually do, of course. So by extension, the idea I'm putting forward here is that if you feel less related to nature, you're not going to be as apt to perform behaviors like walking, like biking, like signing petitions that promote conservation and sustainability. And these are behaviors that matter when we perform them. And so let me focus first on this notion of attention waning and the capacity for nature to help us restore our attention. And if you're seeing the slides right now, you're probably groaning because it's this complex-looking, icky model with lots of pathways and numbers and variables in it. And, you know, a lot of us spend time looking at things like this, or documents, reading, writing, engaged in heavily demanding tasks. And as surely you know, this takes a toll. It becomes difficult to sustain our attention in these cognitively demanding tasks, like looking at a model such as this and interpreting it and talking about it. And the capacity to maintain directed attention is essential. It's what keeps us productive. It's what prevents me from getting up right now to go play with my dog or have some ice cream, which sounds mighty enticing, or get on Facebook. You know, I need to regulate my emotions, my cognitions, and stay on task. And so when my attention wanes, I get irritable, I get anxious, I'm more impulsive, and I'm less productive. And what we know, and oh, if this is interesting to you, if someone wants to hop on Google later, you can type in tests of mental vitality, as I show you on the bottom right, and you can find this out for yourself. You can literally test yourself in some kind of fun, interesting ways. But we happen to know that given our susceptibility to engage in tasks that diminish our attention, there are fortunately a variety of ways to get our attention back. And these ways are elegant and simple, and I was very eager to talk about them tonight. And to sum it up, the idea is that spending time in natural environments, the outdoors, whether it be hiking, biking, or walking, is wonderful, perhaps the most efficient thing we can do to restore our attention. And the reasoning for that, the why underlying this finding, is that nature is really high in the 4 factors that comprise restorative environments. The first being the sense that you're away from the mundane and challenging notion or aspects of daily life. The second being that nature is inherently fascinating. It captures our attention effortlessly. and that's very helpful for restoring attention. Third, nature is very high in extent. There is this sense of scope, whether it be on a narrow trail or in an open field, and that scope often tends to facilitate connectedness that's very powerful. And then finally, this fourth factor of restorative environments is the idea that they promote compatibility. And what I'm referencing there is this idea that the environment provides what we want from it, what we need from it. That is, there's fit between what we're striving for, our goal, and what we get out of the environment. So for instance, you would have compatibility if you're seeking a lunch spot that is quiet and beautiful, and you're able to find that in a garden, for instance. I work at Butler University, and I'm very fortunate to be able to venture down into Holcomb Gardens from time to time. Hopefully those of you in Indianapolis have experienced the beauty there. So to summarize, the natural environment is very high in these restorative features, and thus spending time in it does marvelous things for our attention. So I love to tell my students and friends and family that when you're feeling overwhelmed, irritable, like you can't stay on task, there's a really easy solution, and that's to walk, hike, or bike outdoors for a spell. Just a short spell will help you quite a lot. And this is a short quotation that really summarizes what we know from this theoretical body of work called attention restoration theory. And a related piece I wanted to share with you is one of my very favorite studies in the realm of conservation psychology, a class that I teach and is a great source of passion for me. And this study has to do with something called forecasting. Let me give you a little bit of background here. So the idea is that the decisions we as human beings make are in large part governed by how we think the outcome of that decision will make us feel. So to give you an example of this, we decide whether or not to get married based on the anticipated happiness of spending our lives with someone, whether to pursue a particular program of study based on how happy we think that will make us. Our decisions, whether or not we think about this, are highly invested in their predicted emotional power. And this is both good and bad. Good because it motivates us to pursue things that we think will make us happy, but bad because sometimes we err and we are grossly wrong when we estimate how something will make us feel. So let me apply this idea to something as simple as where you take a walk. And I urge our listeners to think about the place where they walk and how that makes them feel. And so to set the scene a little bit, let me give you some terminology. This idea of forecasting is you casting yourself into the future, making an emotional prediction about the outcome of an event. So in this context of walking, how will walking in the park make you feel? How happy will you be if you walk in the park? And then this idea of experience comes into play. Oh dear, sorry about that. When after the fact, after you undergo the event itself, you report, hey, how did you feel? All right, you walked in the park. What was the actual emotional impact of that experience? And two researchers, Nisbet and Zelensky, quite recently took advantage of this idea of our forecasts, our thoughts about how certain events will make us feel. And they compared people who thought about walking outdoors versus indoors. To give you a little bit of background here, their participants were college students in a college just outside of St. Paul, Minnesota, and they were thinking about either walking in some underground tunnels on campus or outside on a trail. And it wasn't a particularly beautiful trail. It wasn't something awe-inspiring like a national park, but it was a trail outside or a tunnel inside. That's the basic comparison there. And so people made predictions about how they thought they'd feel walking inside or outside. And if you can look at this graph here, and we have that comparison of inside or outside walking on the x-axis and predicted emotion or emotion, positive emotion, one of those emotions being happiness, related positive emotions like interest, enthusiasm, excitement. People forecasted, that is, they predicted that it didn't really matter whether they walked inside or outside. You're like, okay, I'm just going to walk, big deal. That doesn't have a whole lot of implication for how I feel. But if we look at the experience bars, that is the gray bars, you can see a rather large difference, a high magnitude difference between those who walked outdoors and those who walked indoors. And this is quite telling. So the takeaway here is that we don't realize how good it makes us feel, quite literally, how happy we will be upon walking outdoors. We underestimate the positive emotional impact of something as simple as walking outdoors. It has pretty large consequences on our emotional state at any given time. And another aspect of this study that I wanted to squeeze in here in light of what I mentioned earlier is that in turn, those positive emotions aroused in the course of something as simple as walking outside enhances our sense of connectedness to nature, which I earlier mentioned has direct implications for behavior. What do we do to protect the natural world? From something as basic as recycling to something like the transportation choices we make. And so this is a really nice causal chain being put forward here about where you walk makes you feel good and in turn enhances how connected you feel to nature. And this is an aspect of this arena, that is hiking, biking, and walking, that doesn't often get discussed. It's perhaps obvious to those of you who take advantage of the natural world, but I'm of course hoping to inspire those who are not able to as much as they'd like. So in sum then, my talk was focused on the capacity of the natural world to restore our attention and thus enable us to perform our work more effectively, and for something like walking outdoors, and of course that can be extended to hiking and biking as well, to promote happiness and thus make us ultimately more likely to behave in sustainable ways. So that's the sum of my comments at this time, but I'll certainly happily take questions as the evening moves on. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Alison. I'll have to admit that while I might have intuited some of the things you talked about, I had no previous realization of how these things have been studied and how you have brought them out to us in an academic but a very practical way, and I thank you for that. We'll come back to you later, as you know.
Sure.
We're going to move on now to Eric Neagu. If Eric has come online, first let me just check that out. Eric, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Let me go ahead and introduce you first before you speak.
Okay.
Because as you've heard me talk about other people, we have some folks who are on the telephone tonight and they cannot see your bio on the screen. So I'm going to read what's on the screen now and then put you on stage here in just a minute. Eric Neagu is a senior project manager, originally from Michigan City, Indiana. Eric is a civil and environmental engineer who focuses on community development initiatives in both urban and rural settings. Eric sits on a number of boards and committees, including the Grand Calumet AOC Care Committee. He is chair of the Calumet Stewardship Initiative Smart Growth Team, and he is the executive director of Growing Rural, a nonprofit whose mission is community development in exurban and rural areas. Eric has a particular interest in rethinking infrastructure using sustainable green approaches and has worked across the country on strategies to apply green infrastructure where possible. Eric has a BSCE from Purdue University and a MA, Master of Arts, from the University of Chicago. We're honored to have you on the program, Eric, and we're eager to hear your opening remarks.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I think that the structure of this talk is really compelling to me, because what I do really is look at natural amenities and community assets, which are almost always natural in some capacity, whether it be a river or a lake or some other asset, and try to integrate that somehow into communities and how they cultivate and develop their built environment. So what I focus a lot on is built environment relative to community and economic needs. So a lot of us have heard about the triple bottom line, and that sort of guides how we approach things. I am from Northwest Indiana, a place that sort of has definitely shaped how I see the world. For those of you who have not been to Northwest Indiana or not spent much time up there, it is a very convoluted place. It has some of the highest quality natural areas in the country, and then it also has lots and lots of brownfield issues, blight, industrial development, and these things all sit next to each other and try to cohabitate to the best of their abilities. And that, for me, has been a really interesting and compelling question. So by way of background, it's probably worth mentioning a couple of things. One is that I went to Purdue, which is probably the best school in the state of Indiana. My apologies to the professor from Butler. Second is that I moved to Colorado after I went to undergraduate. And out there, I did a lot of development work. And in Colorado, things like trails and preserving wetlands and water quality issues were very, very prevalent in all of the conversations that anybody had around development. It was just part and parcel of the conversation. When a developer did something, they expected to do certain things. So I lived out there for a little while, and then I came back to the Midwest, to the Northwest Indiana area, where I looked around and I thought, well, you know, why aren't people doing this kind of stuff here? Because out west, it seemed like it was just sort of the way things were being done. And I learned that there are a lot of different reasons for that. Some of them being that the communities just were older and were entrenched and had inherited a lot of infrastructure issues and built environment issues. I would argue that that's probably the predominant reason that places like Northwest Indiana and other places in Indiana where things are more rural and agriculture predominates, this is just tradition. I mean, we inherited it 150 years ago, 100 years ago. We weren't thinking, boy, we need a trail here, or boy, we need to preserve this natural area. We were thinking, I live out here, there aren't many other people, I'm going to cultivate my farm, I'm going to build a factory, whatever it was. So now the challenge for communities and for counties and for regions is to figure out how to go back and blend in things like trails and natural spaces and create communities that are much more balanced psychologically, emotionally, economically, in terms of their assets. And lots of communities are starting to embrace this. As the gentleman who talked about trails mentioned, you know, that's a phenomenal statistic that we're at 98% of the state is within 15 minutes of a trail. I am surprised and pleasantly surprised at that, to hear that. especially in Indiana, because I work a lot in a lot of other states, and Indiana is not particularly seen as a progressive state relative to open space planning and those types of things. And I would argue that we're becoming more and more progressive in that arena and recognizing the value of open space planning. So with respect to that, I can mention a couple of projects that we've done in Northwest Indiana that sort of align with that. One of them is sort of is near and dear to my heart, which is Trail Creek. I don't know. I'm a big fly fisherman. I tend to align my work with my interests, which makes my job really fun. So one of the place that I learned how to fly fish is on Trail Creek. If anybody knows Michigan City, they know that there's a big creek, almost a river, that flows through it and out into the harbor and along the lighthouse, which if you watch Parks and Recreation, there's an episode in which the Michigan City Lighthouse is highlighted in a painting. I learned to fly fish on Trail Creek. It's a great salmon fishery, salmonid fishery. They get trout and salmon coming through there. In fact, the water quality is cleared up, and they're now getting other panfish and other things coming in there. But it's called Trail Creek, and it did not have a trail along it. So one of the things that we've done here recently is looked at Trail Creek, and in my professional capacity, we developed an open space plan for about 2,000 acres around Trail Creek, and looking at how do we connect the neighborhoods to the creek, how do we connect the creek to the lakefront, and how do we connect the downtown, which the community is. The creek runs right along the downtown, and if anybody's familiar with the community, you know that Blue Tip Casino is on one side, and then you've got sort of a downtown that is struggling to maintain itself. It has some blighted areas, it has some vacant areas, does not have a whole lot in the way of residential development. How do you use this as sort of a connecting tool? So that's what we did, and we put together a plan that was very, very well received, and we're in the first phases of implementing that. It's a very interesting area. About 2 years ago, almost exactly, as part of the project in developing this open space plan, one of the things we did working with Ball State University and Hanover College and Purdue, and actually even people from Indiana University and some folks came from Michigan State, and the Field Museum was a BioBlitz. So a BioBlitz is in 24 hours, you get a bunch of people who know lots and lots about plants, and bugs, and birds, and bunnies, and all kinds of stuff, and they try to identify everything in a particular geographic area. So we did the only BioBlitz that year in Indiana, and it was in Michigan City, really as part of this project. We got funding from the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, which is based out of Chicago and focuses a lot on the Calumet region. And that helped inform where our sensitive areas, where plants, we may have more invasive plants, and we can sort of do other kinds of developments. Where are the areas where animals are particularly a concern? Where are they not a concern? And I can say, I was actually in the area today. We're doing some work in New Buffalo, Michigan, and I drove through that area, and one of the interesting things that I saw, which is actually somewhat depressing, is there's a trail that may get 2 cars a day, and one of those cars happened to hit a painted turtle, and I took a picture of it today and killed it. So to me, that was sort of striking, and also an impetus to recognize that, hey, there's this wonderful natural area in the middle of this urban development that we still haven't kind of cultivated. We've given it shape in terms of a plan, but we haven't figured out how to put all this stuff together and recognize that animals matter. And, you know, when we talk about nature, I've become a birder. And I tell you, as soon as you start thinking about birds or plants in the context of the built environment, those are great indicators of the quality of the built environment, of the natural amenities relative to the built environment. Not to mention birding is like a $1 billion a year industry in the U.S., so it's a pretty substantial asset to a community like a Michigan City or a Gary, Indiana, or any of those places up there that are on the birding corridor. So we look at those types of issues and try to promote them and try to integrate them into the community such that they improve the quality of life, improve the aesthetic of the community, and really help to drive decision-making. Because one of the things that I haven't touched on is green infrastructure. All this stuff sort of falls under the category of what we call green infrastructure, which is using things like bioswales and permeable pavement and nature, and what nature provides naturally as an infrastructure asset. So the best example would be huge buffer areas in flood zones, which FEMA kind of makes us adhere to a certain extent. But that provides a service relative to water quality. The plants filter out different sediments and things. It also provides a service for wildlife, and it protects us from getting flooded out. So we kind of define this stuff very broadly and try to get communities to use that green infrastructure, because lots and lots of communities are interested in this stuff, not just because it's good to have a bioswale or it's good to have a natural area, but it's also good to rethink how we manage our infrastructure. We have not done that. If you read, I'm a fairly big reader, and this is where my humanities background comes in. If you read ancient Greeks and ancient Romans like Tacitus, you hear them talk about infrastructure, and it really sounds pretty similar to our infrastructure today. They talk about asphalt, they talk about pavers and rock and roads and pipes and canals, and we haven't advanced very far. So the nice thing about trails and green infrastructure and rethinking how our built environment works for me is that not just that those are great things in and of themselves, which they are, but also that we are taking a fresh look at how the built environment works, how our cities function and look and feel. And getting back to the professor's comments, how it feels is really, really important. One can drive through, using Northwest Indiana because that's what I'm familiar with, one can easily drive through I-94 or along the toll road, and one does not feel very welcome. One does not recognize that there's one of the most biodiverse national parks within 5 minutes of both of those highways in the country. One does not recognize that that whole Northwest Indiana region is sort of where biology of the country intersects. You've got southern plants and northern plants and western plants, western prairie type plants, converging with more eastern deciduous forest type plants. And recognizing that and acknowledging that and inviting that into the community is sort of where we spend a lot of time thinking. And communities are becoming much, much more open to that concept and recognizing that there's value in the aesthetic of their community. There's value in how a community feels. It's not just the functionality of the community. So that's kind of what we do and where I wanted to talk a little bit about. The Trail Creek project is just one example. I was with the city planner for Gary on Friday, and some of the guys from the sanitary district, and we're talking about green infrastructure, using that to manage their stormwater issues. So there are a lot of approaches to this that we look at in a lot of angles, but the primary one is really, what does the community need? What's of value to the community, either from an infrastructure standpoint or from a feeling standpoint or an economic development standpoint? How do you blend all these things in a meaningful way, and how do you do it in an affordable way? Because these things often become much more sensible economically for the communities, especially in light of the recent recession. So I think that's really what I wanted to touch on. I don't know if I went long or if I went short, but that's about all I had on my plate.
Thank you very much, Eric. That's very enlightening. I've been up in Northwest Indiana a little bit, but not nearly as much as I would like to now that you've opened the window to some interesting developments up there. And so what we're going to do now in the 15 minutes that we have remaining for this session tonight, we're going to find out from Kathy if there have been any questions posted on the question box, and that would be one source of questions. We may also find an opportunity for panelists to talk to each other. And I have several questions myself of each of the panelists. So, but let's start first of all with you, Kathy, to see if if somebody has raised a question that we can ask one of our panelists.
Yes, Leilani asked if we could list the websites that Bob named. And I would absolutely like to say that I will personally take care of that. I will put that out on our various social media platforms, and I think we have our webmaster on the call. Hopefully we can do a recap of this, this webinar on the website and include some links. I am displaying, by the way, different ways that people can connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Storify, YouTube, and the list keeps growing. And of course, you can use good old-fashioned email. We've got Judy as the primary contact at Sustainable Indiana if somebody has additional questions about this initiative. So that was the only question that actually came from the viewers via the question panel, but maybe I should give a reminder of how to do that. Of course, if you're listening to the recording, this will not be available to you, but if you're joining us on this live webinar today, you can go to the toolbar that for most of you will appear on the right side of your screen. If you don't see that toolbar, please click the reddish-orange arrow. That'll open it up, and you can type your question right in the question area. So while we're waiting for those to come in, John, I know you said you've got questions. I've got questions too. We've got other staff as well.
Well, it sounds like we've got more questions than we have time, so maybe I can call upon our panelists to be just as brief as possible. But let me start with you, Bob. Now, I think you blew us all away with that 98% of Indiana being within 15 minutes of a trail. And that is phenomenal. It might be one of the few very positive, and I say few compared to some other states maybe, but one of the few things that is the top of a good list. And my question to you, Bob, and you can be as brief as possible on this, do you have any way of calculating the usage of these trails? Do we have any trends?
There are multiple communities do trail counts. They're out there. They've been done. There's a professor from IUPUI, Greg Lindsley, that makes a living doing it. So it's really, and there aren't any finite. I mean, there are multiple studies out there, but what we have found is the whole Field of Dreams thing. You build it and they will come. Every trail that we build, small community, large community, rural, urban trails are all getting what, when we go visit these trails and talk to the people who are administrating and manage them, they all say they're just getting tons of use. You know, do I have a specific number? There are, like I said, there are studies, but we continue to fund trails throughout the state because it's once you put one in, it's a piece-by-piece thing that people just want more. They want to connect, and as a community, the people are building trails and connecting out from one to another. And as a state, like I said earlier, our visionary system, we're doing the same thing. So I don't have specifics, but I know that if you were at the Cultural Trail event in downtown Indianapolis 2 weeks ago and saw how many people were out on bikes enjoying that, the opening of that trail, it was pretty amazing. Having been a guy who, I'm a bicycle commuter and have been riding for several years, and I'm an outdoor recreation guy, and the dichotomy, or it's at the tipping point on trails where it used to be it was such a struggle with NIMBYs, not in my backyard folks, and just getting trail on the ground. Now it's like people are coming out of the woodwork to make them happen just because of all the benefits that we've been describing.
Can I offer an anecdote relative to that, which is probably of value? I have a friend who's an attorney, and he lives in Porter County, and he commutes to South Bend every day. And because of that commute and because of the stress of being a lawyer, he put on something like 75 pounds. So he was about 75 pounds overweight. And last year, he was having back problems, high cholesterol, all these things, and he's only in his mid-30s. And he decided, you know what, I'm just going to get a bike, and I'm going to ride my bike till I lose weight. And I guarantee you he would not have done that if there hadn't been an elaborate trail system built in Northwest Indiana, because he tells me about all these trails that he's riding, and he did a 20-mile ride and a 50-mile ride. And he weighs less now than he did in high school. He's lost about 80 pounds.
Okay, there you go. All you people that are worried about weight, you don't have to diet. You just have to get a bicycle.
Yeah.
And keep
on the trail.
Okay. Is there a question that has come in, Kathy?
Yes, I do have a question here from Susan, and curious about the potential for ecotourism in Northwest Indiana. Is that something that any of our speakers see potential for, or how could that be best developed?
Yes, I can answer to that because we do a lot with that. I think that Northwest Indiana really was, and it's not just Northwest Indiana, it's most communities in the Midwest or places where they're really heavily dependent on industry, really looked to industry to provide the 100, 200,000 number type jobs. And as industry has refined itself, particularly at steel mills in Northwest Indiana, those jobs have gone away, mostly because of technological efficiency. So as a result, the communities have looked around and said, well, what else do we got? And they said, we got a big lake. We got a bunch of natural areas that are kind of fragmented. So what they did was they put together what's called the Marquette Plan, which was sponsored a lot by, largely by Pete Visclosky, the Northwest Indiana Redevelopment Authority. NERPC was involved, which is the local COG, the Regional Planning Commission. And they cultivated a series of one large plan, and now they've got these separate subsets of plans. One is called the Greenways and Blueways Plan. And communities are really embracing ecotourism and recognizing that they have a real asset. There are more birding hikes, and I myself organize a hiking series called the Calumet Outdoors Series, which is really intended to highlight all the natural areas in the region. We get lots of people from Chicago that come out regularly. In fact, actually, we get a couple from Fort Wayne who has a summer home in that area that comes up and does our hikes. So it is becoming a real draw. It's becoming a draw for industry, too. There's a company called Fronius that's located in Portage, Indiana, because Portage built, along with the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, a park right on the lakefront called Portage Lakefront Park, which gave them access to the beach. It's a pretty neat park if anybody ever gets up there. It's actually worth seeing.
Okay,
but I think ecotourism.
Thank you, Eric. I've got a question here. I want to put Alison on just a minute before we have to close down here.
Certainly.
Alison, when you were talking about the magic and the benefits of walking and getting outdoors, I started to think about poetry. Now, when I was really young in grade school, the one poem that I can remember from that, and it's been a long time, is I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree. Now, okay, I know that's kind of funny, but my question is, it sounds so much poetry has been inspired by nature. Can you speak to that?
I think, oh, what a wonderful question, John. Yes, and I know that line as well, and it is amazing how it just sort of sears in to the mind. I really attribute this in large part to the cognition benefits, or the cognitive benefits of being in these spaces that free us from our worries for the most part, and these environments are literally expansive, and they have that effect on our ability to think generatively and innovatively as well. So you're absolutely right. It's no surprise that these environments are deep sources of inspiration in which we're apt to do some of our best work.
When I walk in the woods, I feel a certain something special that I don't get otherwise, and it's something different from walking on a concrete sidewalk someplace. There's a hush, there's a certain mystery that puts you into another dimension almost. Okay, well, let's see. Thank you, Alison, for that comment. We have 2 or 3 minutes left, and I want to make sure. I had a question down here for Eric, but I'm going to defer to anybody from the audience, Kathy, that has come up with a question, and I'd like to hear what the question is and who you think you would like to direct it to.
Okay, I think we've actually done a very good job of addressing. There were questions that basically were anticipated, I believe, by our guests. If I could just quickly put in a plug, though, for the Sustainable Indiana Take the Trail initiative.
Please do, sure.
Okay. If anybody would like to find out more about this statewide mass action that is going on, this is an initiative that Sustainable Indiana 2016 is sponsoring this year. You can go to www.sustainableindiana2016.org and click on Take the Trail. You can find events coming up throughout the state. If you have a trail event that you would like to have us list, please go ahead and register that online. And if you would like to just organize a small event, it can be just as simple as you bringing your neighbor, a friend, and telling us you went on a trail hike. We would like to recognize you as part of our Green Honor Roll. And it is our goal to have 2016, which is our bicentennial year, or hopefully plenty more than that, people included in our Green Honor Roll to help us celebrate the beauty of Indiana's trails this year.
Okay, that's a very good subject to bring up. Thank you for that, Kathy. I would also encourage any of you who do hiking and biking to think about some of the things that have been mentioned tonight and to take pictures, write stories of things that you have noticed, maybe even take stock of how your own spiritual and psychological nature has been enhanced by getting outdoors. We would like to put all those things on our blog or on our Story of the Week page. Once again, thank you all for participating in this, and a special thanks to Bob, Alison, and Eric. I want to let everybody know that each one of these presenters tonight have volunteered their time. They have been generous. You can tell that they have prepared and thought about this, and they have really added a lot of value to our whole effort to get more people outside and to take stock of some of the beauty of Indiana, as well as nature in general. Thank you, Kathy, for arranging for this technologically, and we hope that you will be stay tuned, because we will be having more of these webinars coming up throughout the year ahead. So again, good night, good hiking, biking, and walking.